Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the English Daily Book Summary YouTube channel. In order to not stop learning, listen to an English book summary every day for free.
Alexander Vindman. Here, right matters. An American story. The American dream is a frequently debated idea these days, but every once in a while you'll encounter a story that will renew your faith in the whole proposition. Alexander Vindman's journey is one such story. Born in Soviet Ukraine, his family moved to the U.S. when he was just 4 years old in search of a better life and more opportunities. Alexander then rose to become one of the U.S. Army's most respected authorities on Russian and Eastern European affairs. Vindman's family history has a lot to do with why he ended up testifying at President Trump's first impeachment. The America he grew up believing in was different from the authoritarian countries in his family's ancestry. He believed that in America, right matters, and what's right is worth standing up for. The phone call. It was a Thursday morning in late July 2019, and Alexander Vindman found himself in the familiar but always intense setting of the Situation Room in the basement of the West Wing. The situation was this: he and a few other White House officials were about to listen in on a call between President Donald Trump and Ukraine's newly elected leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. Vindman had been working for over a year at the National Security Council, directing policy for Eastern Europe and Russia. As a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, he was no stranger to high-stakes diplomacy, but a lot was on the line today. Ukraine was making real progress towards becoming a more democratic nation, but since Russia's 2014 invasion and annexation of Crimea, it was still in an extremely vulnerable position. Ukraine was the frontline defense against further Russian encroachment, which made it central to U.S. national security policy. Yet despite this, just weeks before the call, the White House had mysteriously frozen nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine, funds essential for its survival. There were other disturbing signs. Rudy Giuliani, the U.S. president's personal lawyer, was running his own foreign policy show far outside any official channels. He was working with U.S. officials like Ambassador Gordon Sondland and Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and their whole mission seemed to revolve around shady deals designed to hurt Trump's political rivals and help his re-election campaign. In a recent meeting, Sondland had hinted that if Zelensky wanted to be invited to the White House, Ukraine would have to launch investigations into Joe Biden and his son Hunter. It was disturbing to Vindman that his work was being undermined for such petty reasons. But it was about to get worse. As the call began, Vindman took notes as Trump immediately began to go off script and veer into dangerous territory. In real time, his worst fears were confirmed. The leader of the free world appeared to be leveraging military aid in exchange for an investigation into the Bidens. When the call ended, Vindman looked around the room. Everyone had heard what he'd heard, but no one was going to act. That's when he knew. It had to be him. In his mind, there was no other choice. He had to report the incident. Not because he wanted to make headlines, and certainly not because he was looking to tank his career, but because it was his duty, as an officer and as an American who still believed that this was not how the nation's government was supposed to function. This decision had everything to do with how Vindman was raised, what his family had been through, and his own experiences in the military. In the next sections, we'll go on a journey that shows how the values of the American dream still live on in Vindman's heart. A classic American immigrant story. Alexander Vindman's earliest memory isn't a happy one. It's the late 1970s, and he and his identical twin brother Yevgeny are stuck in an institution in Soviet Ukraine. They'd gotten into trouble, and now he was getting his mouth washed out with soap. The place felt like an orphanage, but it was technically a sanatorium, reserved for the children of Soviet elites. Alexander didn't know it at the time, but the reason they were at the facility was because his mother was dying. Soon their father arrived, bundled them into a car and drove off, never looking back. But this was just the beginning. In 1979, after losing his wife and growing disillusioned with a system built on lies, corruption, and fear, his father made the life-changing decision to flee the Soviet Union and start over in America. His father, Semyon, was born to a Jewish family in Ukraine. When World War II erupted, they escaped as refugees to the Ural Mountains, after having been turned away at the Russian border. When the war was over, Semyon worked as a civil engineer, but the Soviet Union was virulently anti-Semitic, and being Jewish meant that Semyon was only allowed to rise so far in the ranks. Still, his father's decision to go to America wasn't a career move. It was about escaping oppression in search of dignity, so he gave it all up. On Christmas Day 1979, Semyon arrived in New York with his mother-in-law, his 3 sons, which included the twins as well as their older brother Len, and just $759 to his name. Growing up in 1980s, Brooklyn was a full sensory experience. Subway noise overhead, crowded sidewalks below, and the ever-present hum of Russian and Yiddish being spoken by their neighbors in Brighton Beach, an area affectionately known as Little Odessa. At home, the family spoke Russian, but TV and school fast-tracked their English fluency. Their father hustled hard, first at a furniture store, then passing the civil service exam, and eventually landing a job as a junior engineer with NYC's water department. When he remarried, it gave Alex and his brothers a mother figure who embraced them wholeheartedly. After the marriage, Semyon moved the family to Borough Park to escape what he saw as the stifling comfort zone of their Russian enclave. His advice, which Alex has taken to heart, is, don't just start over, continuously start over. In life, seek growth, not comfort. An education and a Purple Heart. School wasn't exactly Vindman's strong suit. In fact, he flunked out in his first attempt at higher education. His older brother Len had joined ROTC, the Reserve Officers Training Course, inspiring Alexander and Eugene to do the same. At first, Vindman was completely distracted by the ROTC program, but in his second attempt, he graduated with a bachelor's degree in history and a second lieutenant's commission in the Army's infantry branch. While he wasn't consciously pursuing a military career, one soon took shape. In January 2000, he jumped at an assignment in South Korea, where he was stationed at the border with North Korea. He knew it was the kind of high-stakes environment that could shape a soldier into a leader, and that's exactly what he wanted to know. Did he have what it takes to become a good platoon leader? Korea was, in fact, life-changing for Vindman. It felt like he was learning how to think. He sharpened his instinct for terrain, discovered how to adapt on the fly, and started tapping into a form of creative, independent problem-solving he didn't know he had. In one training exercise, he had the guts to do something unheard of, mounting .50 caliber machine guns on supply trucks to take down helicopters. It worked, and instead of getting chewed out, he got promoted. By the end of his Korean deployment, he realized how much he'd grown. He was a solid platoon leader, and for someone who'd never felt solid at anything before, that was a big deal. Of course, everything changed after September 11, 2001, and when Vindman finally landed in Iraq in 2004, Fallujah was already in chaos. The insurgents had taken over after the first U.S. withdrawal, and now the U.S. was gearing up for a full-on battle to take the city back. It was called Operation Phantom Fury, and it was brutal. Vindman's battalion, considered elite, got pulled from their regular brigade and thrown into the fight. Vindman's training was put through one test after another, including one that earned him a Purple Heart medal. While out on patrol, their Humvee was torn open by a roadside bomb. At first, he was unaware that he was bleeding from both his leg and shoulder. Others were badly injured as well, but Vindman knew there was no time to panic. He immediately got his team focused and moving forward again, avoiding further disaster. Fortunately, everyone survived. By the time Vindman left Iraq, he'd learned a great deal more and felt the pain of grief. There was one day when 22 lives were lost, including a few close friends. Some soldiers questioned the purpose of the mission, but there was an unshakable clarity to the courage and sacrifice he witnessed. That's what he would carry home with him at the end of 2005. A new life and new expertise. Before Vindman had left for Iraq, he'd been set up on a blind date with a family friend, a flight attendant named Rachel. Unexpectedly, the two of them hit it off immediately. Sparks were flying, and before long, the feelings turned towards marriage. Vindman shelved the idea. With his deployment to Iraq looming, he didn't want to make Rachel a widow before they could even enjoy a real honeymoon. But once he got back home, they wasted no time. He and Rachel got married in a quick civil ceremony. Still, Military life waits for no one. In 2006, the newlyweds were off to Germany, where Vindman was a commander of a unit stationed in a small Bavarian town. But life as a husband was reorienting Vindman's priorities. The next few years were a challenge as Rachel suffered miscarriages. And in 2009, the couple lost their newborn daughter, Sarah, at just a week old, following complications after a premature birth. The pain of such a loss never really stops. Vindman just had to learn how to live through it. In doing so, he felt something change within him. He realized he could still honor Sarah by embracing life with honesty and integrity. In 2011, another change arrived. They welcomed their second daughter, Ellie, and just a year later, the family packed up and moved across the world again, this time to Russia. At this point, Vindman shifted the gears on his career. Finding himself in his ancestral backyard, he felt compelled to apply for a new role as one of the Army's foreign area officers. This allowed him to dive headfirst into the centuries of tangled history between Russia and Ukraine. Kyiv, the city where his father was born, became his classroom. He crisscrossed the entire former Soviet Union, learning, observing, and reporting. Living in Russia was an eye-opener in itself. There was constant surveillance. Their own apartment was bugged. Vindman saw firsthand how Putin's government uses intimidation as a strategy. He learned about hybrid warfare, how Russia blends tanks in the field with trolls online, and military invasions with fake news campaigns. He was there on the ground in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea and eastern Ukraine, sparking the very crisis that would later end up on his desk at the National Security Council. By that point, Vindman had become one of the Army's go-to Russia experts. Now, he wasn't just reading about history, he was living it. America is different from the Soviet Union, right? By 2016, when Donald Trump was elected, Alexander Vindman's expertise had already taken him to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where he was recruited as a military strategist. Now a major in the Army, Vindman's insights into Russian strategy and culture were needed for figuring out how to respond to growing Russian aggression. He was good enough at his job that he was soon tapped to join the National Security Council. Before he even took the job at the NSC, one of his old Army mentors warned him, this would be the toughest, most dangerous assignment of his career. The danger wasn't bombs or bullets, but politics. Still, Vindman didn't see it coming. His boss at the time, Fiona Hill, called him out on his naivete. Indeed, he had to learn the hard way that some in the Trump administration were involved in political schemes that had nothing to do with America's best interests. So, on July 25, 2019, after hearing the call, he went straight to his brother Eugene's office. Alongside Alexander, Eugene had also climbed the ranks to become a deputy legal advisor to the NSC. At this time, Alexander didn't expect an impeachment trial. He thought cooler heads would prevail. He was only certain that he needed to report it. As the person responsible for Ukraine policy at the NSC, that was his job. And more than that, his values, his upbringing, and his training told him that this wasn't something you ignore. After discussing with his brother, he met with John Eisenberg, the NSC's top lawyer. This meeting didn't go as planned. Eisenberg started talking about locking the call transcript away on a secret server. Not normal, not okay. Then a few days later, Eisenberg warned Vindman not to talk to anyone else about the call. The thing was, Vindman wasn't alone. Someone else in the meeting had filed a whistleblower complaint. Now things were moving fast, and yet at the same time, he was being considered for a promotion to colonel, along with a position at the prestigious U.S. Army War College. A few days ago, this all felt like a sure thing, but not anymore. Once the inquiry into the whistleblower's report verified it as legitimate, he received a subpoena to testify. He knew testifying at an impeachment inquiry could mean the end of his career. But the bigger issue remained. The president's attempts to strong-arm a foreign leader to investigating a political rival crossed a line. Vindman believed it was his duty to tell the truth, even if his father didn't. Given his experience within the Soviet Union, his father feared reprisal, ruin, and the kind of political punishment he'd escaped. He begged his son not to testify, but Vindman stood firm. This was America. It was different. Here, right matters. The testimony and the fallout. Vindman's strategy was simple: to tell the truth, stay calm, and stick to the facts. With Rachel's help, he wrote the opening statement to his first closed-door testimony. It was all about framing his testimony not as a partisan act, but as a direct continuation of his service to the country that gave his immigrant family a chance to thrive. When someone leaked his statement to the press, the response was overwhelming. He was hailed as a hero by some and attacked as a traitor by others. Cable news, including Fox and MSNBC, ran his words over and over, thrusting a quiet, behind-the-scenes military officer into the national spotlight. And nothing, not even his Purple Heart, could shield him from the brutal glare of polarized politics. On October 29, 2019, his testimony took place behind closed doors. It was a grueling 10.5-hour session, where he was not only the first witness who had served on the White House staff, but also the first to have first-hand knowledge of the phone call. Vindman was perhaps naive to have hope for some level of objectivity from elected officials. Instead, he was met with aggressive tactics from Republican lawmakers who seemed to have a purposeful disregard for the truth. Meanwhile, right-wing media outlets and public figures questioned Vindman's loyalty, even suggesting dual allegiance due to his Ukrainian birth and language skills. While these absurd attacks would eventually be discredited by others, they were amplified by Donald Trump Jr., and posed real threats to Vindman's career. Despite this, Vindman moved forward with public testimony on November 19th. This time, millions watched live. He gave a new opening statement, highlighting his father's fear of government reprisal, reframing his testimony as a defense of American ideals over authoritarianism. Afterward, Vindman received widespread public support, while the internal retaliation only intensified. He was sidelined at the NSC, and his family received threats. On February 7, 2020, shortly after the Senate acquitted the president, both Vindman and his brother were dismissed from their posts. Despite having acted on a subpoena and adhering to his professional duty, Vindman's decision to tell the truth ultimately cost him his career. Seek change and growth, not comfort. Even though Vindman was pushed out of his post at the NSC, he remained in the Army, with a pending promotion to full colonel and a comfortable position at the War College. Soon it became clear that his promotion was being held up. President Trump wasn't going to sign off on it. What's more, since his name was one among many on a long list, his unusual circumstances were holding up other people's promotions. Either Vindman could push the issue, forcing a move that would shine a light on how he was being penalized for simply doing his job, or he could take himself out of the equation. Meanwhile, the global pandemic was wreaking havoc, and President Trump was proving ineffective at managing the crisis. For a while, Vindman felt paralyzed, uncertain, and trapped. His wife, Rachel, sharp as ever, saw the writing on the wall. Her advice was clear: get out now. So that's what he did. He filed for retirement in July 2020, and once he did, the Army finally released the promotion list, with his name on it. But Vindman didn't just walk away. He pivoted. He remembered his father's advice. Don't just start over, continuously start over. On August 1st, his first day as a civilian, he published an op-ed in the Washington Post, publicly calling out Trump's failures and promising to keep serving the country in a new way. Now he's a civilian, a consultant, writer, speaker, and doctorate student at Johns Hopkins, still committed, still fighting for the values that matter. Final summary. In this Blink to Here, Right Matters by Alexander Vindman, you've learned that Vindman's story began as an immigrant kid from the Soviet Union who grew up believing in the American dream. A career Army officer, Vindman learned important lessons in leadership during his first deployment in South Korea. Those lessons were put to the test in Iraq, where he earned a Purple Heart. Back home, he got married, started a family, and transitioned to intelligence work, which landed him a key role at the National Security Council. There he found himself in the room during President Trump's call with Ukraine's president, where he bargained military aid in return for political favors. Vindman felt duty-bound to report the call through proper channels. When a whistleblower's report also arrived, Vindman became a star witness in the impeachment hearings, which also cost him his military career. But he's steadfast in his belief that America should not willfully submit to the kind of strong-arm authoritarian leadership that his family fled from. These ideals are worth protecting, even if it means being forced to start over. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. See you in the next Blink.